Hi, I'm Gary Williams with Berkshire Hathaway Home Services Select Properties, and today's topic is easements. Easements around your property line. Pretty much everybody who has a home in a residential subdivision will have some easements around their property, and they're typically for utilities to come in and out of your property to do service work. If you have overhead power lines, we have a pipeline at the fence line, so they need to be able to access the pipeline. So several years ago they came through and cleared out a bunch of trees so they could see the pipeline from the air to inspect it. It's something that they had to do. We had to agree to it because there was already an easement in place before the homes were even built. Homes in my subdivision were built in the 70s. The pipeline easement was actually first established, I think, in the late 1940s or 50s. So it was here before the houses were here, and the pipeline already had an easement. So when people built homes, moved in, that easement was there, and over time they needed to clear out the trees, so they came through and cleared them out. There's a lot of things you can do and a lot of things you can't do in an easement. You can plant small plants and things like that, but if you plant a big tree and they need access, well, they're probably going to either clear it or ask you to clear it. Another thing you can't do in an easement is you can't make a permanent structure. Say if you're going to put a shed with a concrete floor, something you can't do. You could do it, but if they need to access what's underneath that, they would have you remove it, or they would probably charge you to remove it to access what they need to do to correct any issues that may have come up with what they have underneath there. So it's always a good idea to know what's around your property lines if you have easements and the purpose of them. Funny story, when we were kids, I grew up, I guess, in the 70s and 80s, and we used to hunt down on railroad tracks. And they had an easement on both sides, and railroads years ago would allow you to hunt, but there really wasn't any rule that they had to. So here's a good example. A friend of mine reached out to me last year, and there was a dispute with some hunters over another guy who owned the property, and the hunters were saying, well, we can hunt in the easement. Not really. They thought you can hunt in any easement. Well, actually, when you have an easement, it is described for the person that needs to access the property, typically a utility. Or there can also be right-of-ways where one landowner lives behind another one, so they have a right-of-way easement to get to their property, and it's typically on one side or the other of the property. They can't build on it, but they can go through it to get to their property. You can't be landlocked. You can't be surrounded by 4 different properties and not be able to access your property, so that would be a right-of-way easement. But there's a lot of different details on easements, surveys, things like that. If you have any questions about that, reach out to me. And as always, if you're building, selling, buying, relocating, general maintenance tips, or what I'll be cooking on the grill this week, reach out to me. I'm happy to help.